And we continue at 1:05 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show, broadcasting live from the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa Living Room Studios, where you can play blackjack for hours, and it feels like 5 minutes. Mr. Randy Wanks at the sports desk in Culver City.
John, after months and months and months and months of Hollywood being on strike, it looks like SAG-AFTRA has made a deal with the AMPTP, and Hollywood is going to be back open.
I cannot believe it, quite frankly.
You know, if that strike went on any longer, they were going to have to let cameras go into federal prison so we could have another season of Chris Lee Knows Best.
You people are crazy.
800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is a pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the editor of the Guss Report. You can get him online at danielguss.substack.com and follow him on Twitter at the Guss Report, 2 S's in Guss. Daniel Guss, welcome.
Gentlemen, thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by. We spent a lot of time when the story broke covering the sexual harassment allegations and subsequent lawsuits related to former top Garcetti advisor Rick Jacobs, where a Los Angeles police officer claims that he was sexually harassed repeatedly by Rick Jacobs while Eric Garcetti was in office. Frequently, the sexual harassment would take place in the presence of the mayor. The police officer said no one did anything to stop it. When he would complain about it to other people, they essentially would just say, oh, that's just Rick being Rick. Rick also had other allegations against him from other employees at City Hall, some of them political appointees, by the way, from the mayor himself, Eric Garcetti. He denied all of these allegations, said that he did nothing inappropriate. The mayor stood by Rick Jacobs. Rick Jacobs is still a confidant of the mayor, certainly hasn't been excommunicated from the inner circle. He was showing up at various events for current Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, although I don't believe he has any formal role in her administration. What do you make of this settlement, and what are the details we should be paying attention to?
Well, with that introduction, let me point out that this wasn't just a Matthew Garza versus Rick Jacobs and Eric Garcetti thing. Garza's allegations were substantiated by other very high-ranking people within the Garcetti administration. And kudos specifically to Naomi Seligman, who's one of his communications people, who confirmed similar misconduct by Rick Jacobs. So it was allegation-based that was substantiated by other people who were in the inner Garcetti sanctum. So with that, by the way, your porno music bed would be perfect under this segment, because it's as salacious as it can be. Because, jeez. Be careful what you wish for.
That's going to distract you way too much, Gus. Just keep going.
Okay, so the settlement came out yesterday in L.A. City Council that $1.8 million was approved for settlement in this case. But it's very clear that this lawsuit dragged on for years. And I'm trying to now find out how much more the suit cost the taxpayers of Los Angeles, because the settlement was just $1.8 million. How many hundreds of thousands of dollars was spent on city attorney time, outside counsel, these people who were assessing Matthew Garza's credibility? And I'm going to guess, just top of my head, I'm going to guess it cost at least $1 million more than the $1.8 million to settle. And this morning, last night, I reached out to City Controller Kenneth Mejia to see if they are going to find out how much it cost. And I'm reaching out to the city attorney's office to find out how much. But what I really is, when did the city of Los Angeles or its outside counsel have enough information to start negotiating the settlement? Because I have to wonder was this settlement delayed until Eric Garcetti's tortured nomination to become ambassador to India was approved and he was out of the country for a few months? Because was the clock running all this time between his Garcetti's confirmation by the Senate and now? So there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye, but it's dirty as hell, and it's the same old thing where they all gather around to protect Garcetti so he can get on to his next adventure.
Who is it that ultimately decides if the city settles? Is it the city attorney? Is it some outside counsel that they hire? Is it the mayor, him or herself? Who is it that gets to decide whether or not we settle this?
Well, the final decision was yesterday by the Los Angeles City Council. And by Los Angeles City Council, I'm referring to its president, Paul Krikorian, who decides on his own whether or not an issue like the proposed settlement of $1.8 million gets on the agenda to be approved or rejected altogether. So it's really Paul Krikorian, and like good little soldiers, the other 14 council members generally follow the council president's lead, like they did for Wesson, like they did for Garcetti and Alex Padilla. So ultimately, it's Paul Krikorian who gets it on the council agenda. It was approved 13-0 yesterday. Before that, it was Bob Blumenfield, whose budget and finance kind of pushed it along. By the way, that's where all the public comment was. You couldn't comment on this at the council meeting yesterday. And before that, it was on either City Attorney Heidi Feldstein Soto or outside counsel's recommendation, because they were going to get reamed, pardon the expression, for upwards of $5 million or more if this thing went to trial. And that makes me think that there is a lot more to the case than just Matthew Garza. What else did Matthew Garza know is what I want to find out.
Well, I think you're 100% correct that they just sat on the ball and they dragged this out as long as humanly possible because they could not allow the settlement to take place while Garcetti was currently in office as mayor, because that would be an awful look, or while he was awaiting confirmation from the U.S. Senate. They needed to wait until he was out of office, he was in his new office, won confirmation, and no one had the ability to fire him.
Exactly. And I want to know, was the meter running all these months while between the time that they kind of finished their investigation, they knew what it was worth, and advancing it to Blumenfield, to Krikorian, and the council? Because why? Lawyers don't sit around on cases when they can get onto other ones. They don't sit around on them for free. And you could be sure that the city of Los Angeles wasn't hiring the ambulance chaser. We probably had very expensive outside counsel on this saying, let's pause this, and lawyers don't sit on cases that long without getting paid.
At the same time that all of this was going on, Eric Garcetti was one of the first big city politicians to come out in favor of defunding the police. He very famously showed up to one of the protests and took a knee. He went before a crowd and grabbed the microphone and referred to the police as killers. His relationship with the LAPD, particularly in his second term, really soured. And there are a lot of people in Garcetti land who, maybe not publicly, but privately, were grumbling that they thought that this might be part of the payback from the police against Garcetti for coming out in favor of defunding them. What would you say to those grumbles?
Well, I can tell you from my personal experience, and this is actually why, just as a little sidebar, I'm actually concerned about terrorism attacks in the city and county of Los Angeles and the state. So in my direct experience in researching and investigating the stories that I publish on Substack, I have found that the LAPD gets involved in petty, minute politics at the highest level of the agency. I know this because, John, I'm like, one or two steps above the bottom rung of journalism in L.A. And if you had any idea how much time the LAPD spends trying to derail me and my stories on freaking Substack, it would not surprise me at all. I have no evidence of it, but it would not surprise me at all if the right people at either the LAPD or the LA Police Protective League may have tipped off this person or that person, and things reached a critical mass. So it wouldn't surprise me because that is, and I'm a supporter of law enforcement. I want better law enforcement, but I'm a supporter of a law and order community. But it would not at all surprise me to find out at some point, if we ever do, that the LAPD was tipping off people at some level. I can't prove it, but it rings true that it could be.
We're speaking with Daniel Guss, who you can read online at danielguss.substack.com. Daniel, has anyone reached out to Eric Garcetti for comment on the settlement?
I don't know if anybody has reached out to him. I know that I did, obviously, because he's not going to respond to me. I have his personal email address, but whether anybody else did, I don't know, and I don't think so. I think that they see him as yesterday's news and that it's gone. Let's pay this off. The taxpayers won't know one way or the other about $1.8 million, $3.8 million. So I can tell you that the Los Angeles Times sent somebody a few days ago to India to do this ridiculous puff piece on this guy, as though he has some sort of future in politics when he turns out as Biden's flunky ambassador to India. Now, why in the world the Times would do that? The only thing I can think of is maybe to help soften the blow that people will see that story about all the great things he's supposedly doing as ambassador in India, as opposed to what was coming next. And by the way, this settlement approved yesterday by City Council didn't come out of the blue. This has been going back and forth in City Hall for several months. So they knew that this was coming, and just a few days before it hit the City Council agenda, they do this ridiculous puff piece that is laughable in what it tried to portray Garcetti as doing, as having some sort of political reincarnation. It's absolutely absurd, but no surprise from the LA Times.
Do we know if the police officer is still on the force, or did he resign his position with the LAPD? And I say that because this city is so political, and this city is controlled by one party. If I were a police officer that sued the machine that runs the city successfully and embarrassed them and almost derailed one of them getting an ambassadorship, I would know that the knives would be out for me, and I would not feel comfortable working for that city. Is he still employed at the LAPD?
I can't find that out, which shouldn't be a surprise because I send media inquiries to the LAPD all the time. But it would be well. One thing I did see the other day is that after this happened, he was given some sort of headquarters assignment with reduced income because he wasn't getting the Garcetti overtime or the special rate that he was supposed to get because of no longer working on the Garcetti beat. But there is a consistency of this happening, including but not limited to the LAPD's media relations division, where one of their sergeants a couple years ago landed a big payday because he filed a discrimination suit against the media relations division, which apparently didn't want Spanish language broadcasts being played in their suite in the headquarters. So I can't find that out yet, and I am trying to reach his attorney, Greg Smith, not the Greg Smith of City Council, the Greg Smith who represented Matthew Garza.
What is Rick Jacobs up to right now?
If history is any indication, grabbing people or feigning to. But for people, and I don't know that to be a fact, I'm just trying to have a little humor in this. There is always a place for people like Rick Jacobs in these inner circles. When you're cast out of favor, you can kind of sort of come back. In the Nuri Martinez racism scandal, somehow Herb Wesson's son was the chief of staff for Ron Herrera of the LA County Fed, and Nuri Martinez's chief of staff, Alexis Wesson, the two of them were married, was her chief of staff. And still they find jobs within the system to keep them employed, to keep everybody happy, and hoping that their names fade. So there's always a place in these circles for people like Rick Jacobs and other people who are too close to controversy. And that's the way it goes. And that just shows you how no matter how embarrassing the scandal is, there's always going to be a job for the children of this one and for the right-hand man of that one.
I've never met Rick Jacobs before, so I don't know exactly what type of person is he. Given everything that you've learned through your reporting, is he one of these guys that's just a throwback from the Mad Men era where different rules applied, but he meant no harm by it? He's just one of these people that the times have passed him by when it comes to how you're supposed to behave in an office? Or was he actually predatory?
What his soul thinks is not what I don't know what he's thinking in his soul parts. He's not that much older than Garcetti. So if he was born maybe in the 20s or 30s or 40s or maybe even the 50s, you could see it as being a throwback. But I can't say it's a throwback because it appeared to be predatory at every different level. What Naomi Seligman alleged, what Matthew Garza alleged, and it's consistent, by the way, with the predatory nature of city council. Jose Weezer getting grabby with this one, and then with that one, and it goes on, and it's nothing that was unique to Rick Jacobs. It is something that appears to be commonplace in LA City Hall. I would like to cover other local governments, but there's so much crap going on in City Hall. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. So what was in Rick Jacobs' soul, what his motivation was, I don't know. But apparently, when you're close to the mayor and the mayor is amused or titillated by your antics, apparently he felt that he could get away with it, and he did. Until Matthew Garza stepped up and Naomi Seligman backed him up. And she's the unsung hero or heroine in this case.
We're speaking with Daniel Guss, who you can follow on Twitter at the Guss Report. Daniel, while I have you here, I want to ask you about a story that we did late last week that was uncovered by Fox 11's Phil Schuman, and I haven't really seen it anywhere else. Phil Schuman did a report on the DUI arrest of Wendy Carrillo, the assemblywoman who is running to replace Kevin De Leon on the Los Angeles City Council. In the report, he played videotape that one of the neighbors shot while the DUI sobriety test was being conducted on the assemblywoman. And the individual who was the police officer who was conducting the investigation said that they were going to have to take her to a private place for the sobriety test because we have a policy for dignitaries in Los Angeles where we don't conduct those tests in public. We only do it behind closed doors in the name of quote-unquote transparency. It didn't sound like it was something that he was doing off the cuff. It sounds like something that's some kind of policy that resulted from some kind of training. Do you know if that is in fact true? And if so, how the hell are they allowed to do that?
Well, I don't know if it's policy because the LAPD has this magnificent knee-jerk response when I ask questions like this, as the legend Phil Schuman did, is that they say, well, this is an open investigation, so we can't tell you. And that's what the LAPD tends to do with me until I do an end round around them. But let's go back to before Jose Weezar's life fell entirely apart. Jose Weezar, former LA City Councilman, was allegedly involved in a car accident coming home from a political event X number of years ago. And the rumor is that he was allowed to sober up, as the rumors go, in the back of a patrol car for an undetermined amount of time before giving him a field sobriety test. So if that widely believed rumor is true, it does appear to fit a pattern in practice. But let's be clear, neither Wendy Carrillo nor Jose Weezer are dignitaries. They are local politicians. It's not like it was the emirate from the Middle East. They're local politicians. So if they are dignitaries, that's a matter of wordplay. But from my understanding, and the LAPD, the funny thing is the LAPD doesn't love to tell you things when it's something that appears to make them look bad. So what's the policy? The LAPD has a lot of unspoken policies that would probably be big eye-openers to the public because you wouldn't get, or maybe you would get better treatment, but I certainly wouldn't. A TV reporter from Channel 5 once told me, be careful where you go and what you post on social media, because they would love nothing more than to exploit and get perp walks of people who criticize the LAPD, whereas in this case, I believe Phil Schumann. He's been at it for decades, and if he says it, it's more than likely true.
Whatever their policy is towards sobriety tests and those sorts of things is what the policy is, and I don't have a problem with that. However, everyone should be treated equally. The fact that she's an assemblywoman should have nothing to do with how they test her, because if she was a small business owner or a firefighter or a teacher or whatever, she would be treated very differently, and it shouldn't be like that. We're all the same. We should all be treated the same.
Right. And when I asked the LAPD for the information, they wouldn't send me what's called a 9-line, the basic informations of, who was arrested, when, where, and all of that stuff. And somehow it got out to the media that she tested, she allegedly tested twice the legal limit. And when I asked the LAPD, hey, why aren't you sending me this? I'm an accredited, credentialed media person, and they just shrug and they kind of laugh, because that's what the LAPD does. So as much as I want the LAPD to be good and great, they still do these petty politics. And collectively, John and Randy, I really believe LA is at great risk because they spend so much time on the petty politics. Not to veer off from the Wendy Carrillo thing, but it rings true, because they're involved in protecting these people who either do or will or may in the future vote on their next contract. And that's how it goes, and that's how it's going to go till we start voting for people who don't necessarily have a D or an S for socialist next to their name.
And I'll tell you, part of me feels for the police, because if you have someone who's there who did something illegal, and if you just go ahead and cook the books a little bit, you can get them out of trouble. They're going to be sitting across that bargaining table from you. They're the ones that are going to determine what kind of pay you get, what kind of health care you get, what kind of pension you get. And the threat, not just the desire, I guess, to get a better contract, but the threat of, if you enforce the rules and she gets in trouble, you're going to get punished at some point in the future. I'm sure that's top of mind for all of these cops whenever they have someone like that in trouble.
Absolutely. You can put money on it. I have spoken to dozens of frontline officers for the LAPD, and similarly to a lot of people with the LA Fire Department at the city and the county level. And these are people who are there literally putting their life on the line every minute of the day that they're out in public, in a patrol car or on duty as undercovers. And so what they go through just on a daily basis is life-threatening every minute that they're out there. But it is influenced and hampered, or handcuffed, to use a phrase, by the politics, not just of the LAPD, but the LAPD Commission, the LA City Council, and the mayor's office. And of course, the unions are involved in all of this also. So the people, the men and women who are on the front lines, it's tough enough doing their job, but there is a tremendous amount of influence that bends what they do and how they respond. And then you add cameras into it. More often than not, cameras save them from trouble. But it's a very, very difficult job. And that may be what's at stake with the 4 suicides that happened a few days ago in the LA County Sheriff's Department. It's like it is a much tougher job than people realize. It's not just driving around town looking for guys stealing bikes and selling weed.
Daniel Guss, thank you so much for stopping by. Always a pleasure.
I'll be here. Thank you for having me on.
You can read Daniel online at danielguss.substack.com and follow him on Twitter at the Guss Report. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, if you want to go back and listen to a past episode, that is easy to do.
That's right. Go to KABC.com, click on podcasts, or go to the Apple Podcasts app, iHeart, Spotify, search for The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe. You can download all the episodes that way. You can download the KABC app, search KABC AM in the Apple App Store or the Android Store. Easiest way to listen live to this station whenever you're outside the AM radio signal. And you can download all the podcasts of the show. Let me specifically recommend the 12 o'clock hour from yesterday.
The bureaucracy is real.
And the 1 o'clock hour from the day before.
And coming up later on in the month, we're going on the road.
That's right. Make sure you come see us broadcast live Friday, November 17th. That's a week from tomorrow. It's already almost here. We're going to be at the brand new Gelson's West LA at West Edge on the corner of Olympic and Bundy. The Gelson's West LA at West Edge is open now. It's absolutely gorgeous in there. You've got to see it, and you will, because we're going to be there at the Beer, Wine, and Sushi Bar, noon to 3, Friday, November 17th. See you there.
In the meantime, what do you say we make a couple of listeners very happy?
Well, let's do that right now. 790 KABC welcomes Pentatonics, the most wonderful tour of the year at the Acrisure Arena, November 14th. Tickets are on sale now at Ticketmaster.com, but right now, caller number 9 at 1-888-790-5222 gets pair of tickets to the show. Tickets furnished by Live Nation. Good luck dialing.
Well, we know from the fire chief that half of all fires in Los Angeles are started by homeless encampments. It's not just Los Angeles where the homeless are starting fires. It's up and down the state. And in Sacramento, Randy, they're starting fires not from outdoor cookouts or trying to get their meth prepared. They're starting fires by stealing electricity.
That's right. Take a street lamp, any street lamp. If there's an access point, it's probably been ripped off, and there's extension cords and loose wires that are powering all of the appliances inside the tents and the homeless encampments, maybe even an RV. They are incredible fire dangers, and apparently there's nothing we can do about it.
That seems to be the answer for a lot of things.
Could be the name of this show. There's nothing we can do about it with John and Randy.
And all this time, I thought if we ever did a podcast, we could call it Quite Frankly.
Quite frankly.
For more on this, here is KCRA 3 in Sacramento.
They light the way around Sacramento for safety. But some of the city's 30,000 streetlights are also being vandalized, and it's proving...
See, that's actual vandalism.
Not George Gascon's idea of vandalism.
George Gascon's ideal of vandalism, well,
quite frankly,
I can't even describe it on the air.
And it's proving dangerous.
It's an inherent fire danger.
Inside this homeless camp at 28th and X Streets, KCRA 3 Investigates found an extension cord running from an in-ground city utility box to more cords, which fan out in 4 directions into several tents.
When you're tampering with...
They've got a whole access point.
They've really thought this through more than the people who are supposed to prevent them from doing that.
And if you're the guy who has all those power cords, you can probably get a lot of heroin to give someone some juice to charge their phone.
I love heroin.
When you're tampering with any type of electricity that's not permitted, or maybe that box can't handle the load that you're going to put on it, it's obviously a fire concern of ours.
How many of these fires are not started by propane tanks blowing up or homeless people lighting each other on fire, but are electrical fires because they've destroyed all the street lamps in the city? And this is not just happening in Sacramento. This is happening down here, too.
Well, if you've ever done a remodel or if you've ever built a house from the ground up, one of the things that happens when the city comes to perform an investigation is they look at all of your electrical outlets and they look very closely at your electrical grid, because if it's not safe, a fire could start. It's very difficult to get everything up to code because they require so much out of the homeowners to pass the inspection. Juxtapose that with what's going on in these homeless encampments where it's anything goes, live wires all over the place.
The Sacramento Fire Department found this power cord setup in August. This wasn't the cause of a fire, but they noted the wires during the investigation. The department doesn't track how many fires are started by stealing electricity from power poles.
Well, why aren't we tracking that?
Yeah, that's something that's relevant.
It's not really rated to handle any type of...
Do you think the homeless pay attention when we have a flex alert?
I want all of you to remember this, all of you out there in Radio Land. When another insurance company pulls out of the state and our elected officials respond to it by saying, well, it's global warming, there's nothing that we can do about these fires. Remember that they know that the homeless are stealing electricity in very dangerous ways, and they're not shutting it down.
Any type of accessory load that you're putting on it, whether that be from a power strip of charging a trailer or if you're charging other devices that require a lot of amperage.
Well, that's actually a fire inside somebody's tent.
Jenna Abbott with the Sacramento Metro Chamber of Commerce tracks fires as part of her job working on business improvements, and she says she's witnessed power theft firsthand.
Power had been taken from a power pole and run to the hot tub so that it could function, the motors could function. So
Wait a second. There's a homeless encampment with a hot tub?
How the hell do they have a hot tub in a homeless encampment?
They stole it from Home Depot?
Is it above ground?
It would have to be.
I don't know. Some of these encampments have been there a while.
Well, since they don't require permits to do anything, they probably could move pretty fast on an in-ground hot tub.
Wasn't there a 2-story homeless encampment in Marina Del Rey at one point?
Oh, yeah. It had a loft. They were renting it out on Airbnb.
Okay, so we have 2-story homeless encampments, and now we have homeless encampments with electric-powered hot tubs.
You want to go for a spa day? It's right there on the street.
Do you think they're using chlorine?
Do not go in the water.
power had been taken from a power pole and run to the hot tub so that it could function, the motors could function. So I think that was probably the most outrageous theft of power that I have ever seen.
Abbott also took this picture of a utility pole on fire. The cause wasn't determined, but scenes like this worry her.
I feel like even though I have no experience in fire investigations, I can tell you the cause of that fire.
This isn't rocket science.
If the wires are exposed on the bottom and people who don't know what they're doing are trying to plug everything they own into it, chances are it's a fire hazard.
By the way, speaking of fire hazards, if you have live wires with juice coming out of it, and you have a hot tub that's being powered by that electricity, do you realize if one of those live wires goes in the hot tub and there are people sitting in the hot tub, they're going to be electrocuted?
These people are already living on the edge.
Well, if something sparks and you have a cord running into a tent, there's a lot of flammables around a tent, and oftentimes there are things like propane tanks, and once it gets going, it can go fairly quickly and be pretty hard to put out.
This is why in my neighborhood, the Sepulveda Basin Wildlife Preserve, where there are a bunch of homeless that live in Balboa Park, gets set on fire every single year.
I'll tell you, if I was homeless and I was living in an encampment that had electricity all over the place in all kinds of dangerous ways like this, I think I'd find a new encampment.
You know, if someone wants to make a ton of money, we got to figure out how to do tents that are solar powered.
That encampment is going to get lit up like a Christmas tree.
In 2022, the city received about 250 service requests related to vandalism of street lighting infrastructure. The city says some of the vandalism includes tripped circuit breakers, damage to the wiring, damage to underground conduits and underground electrical boxes, as well as damage to the street poles. The city has installed resistant pull box lids for in-ground electrical boxes, handhole covers, and steel shackles around the outer case of above-ground electrical service boxes.
Yeah, this is what they do now. It's the same thing that they've been doing in the San Fernando Valley with all the people that stole the copper wiring from the street lamps. They have made the access points so difficult to open that if a maintenance crew actually needs to get in there, they need a jackhammer.
Think about what we're doing in the state right now. We don't want to put anyone in prison, and a lot of the bad guys are stealing catalytic converters. So instead of putting them in prison for stealing catalytic converters, we're just recommending that people buy cages to put underneath their car. Because so many cars are the victims of smash and grabs, the LAPD, instead of cracking down on the people who are burglarizing the cars, they tell you to not leave any loose change or empty bottles in your car to make yourself a target. And now we can't stop the homeless from stealing electricity. So instead of saying, hey, why don't you guys do something else, we're booby-trapping the electrical grid.
The city is hoping measures like this prevent power theft in the future.
It's dangerous, and it's dangerous not only for the people experiencing homelessness, but it's
Can we stop with the nomenclature?
Especially when they're stealing electricity and might light the entire town on fire.
At that point, you can call them criminals. They're breaking the law.
It's dangerous for the businesses.
In Sacramento, Michelle Bandur, KCRA 3 News.
So the city says to call 311 if you see theft of power or vandalism to a power pole. The city can't determine exactly how much power is stolen each year from these light poles, but says repairs cost hundreds of dollars for just one pole. Do you have a tip for KCRA?
Oh, boy.
Yes. If you see this happening, before you call 311, my advice is to run for the hills. Because it could blow. And then you're going out Tom Leykis style. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Sarah writes in at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. Listening to your show right now, when you're talking about the homeless stealing power, you might also want to check out the number of homeless that steal water out of the fire hydrants. For example, I see this every other day when I get off the 10 freeway to go to work on the corner of Broadway, and there's a guy that washes his clothes on the fire hydrant on that corner. I believe he's also got extension cords, so he's stealing power from somewhere else, but I see hoses that he's attached to the fire hydrant to wash his clothes and bathe on the street corner.
That doesn't seem sanitary either.
And it's good to know that when the fire department has to come out for a homeless encampment fire, they can't even use the fire hydrant to put out the fire that was started by the electrical wiring because it was vandalized.
How could you bathe with a fire hydrant? Isn't the pressure in a fire hydrant pretty intense?
So's heroin.
I love heroin.
I mean, good Lord. If you try to bathe in a fire hydrant, it's going to blow you 3 blocks down the road.
Not saying these people have thought this through.